Coming up on this week's Redcast.
What does a bank have to do? It has to be able to do controls end to end, which will pick up many different types of suppliers. It's going to take us years to sort out the detailed standards to work out what do we think good looks like.
So many other industries are reliant on financial services because the whole idea is to buy or sell something. And 9 times out of 10 these days, payments are electronic or digital.
How willing are we to envisage scenarios of disruption? Collectively, we're not great. We're not great at envisaging disruption because it's uncomfortable.
These are legacy relationships. This is decades of archaeology to figure out how these relationships were formed. And that positioning conversation is critical, and we all want to have better types of cross-silo type conversations. But
clients looking for more transparency, more flexibility, a different way of working, that is not an adversary. We have to be honest about all of the legacy dust that we've acquired that needs a good sweep out, and taking this as an opportunity not to name and shame and blame people for the things they didn't do in the past, acknowledging that it is as it is, and then trying to make it better.
Hi, I'm PJ, CEO and founder of JWG, and welcome to Redcast. I am absolutely delighted to be able to introduce this 5th and unfortunately final episode for 2024 on winning the Opres Marathon. Well, I want to position this very carefully for everybody, and because I think it's really important for us to reflect a bit on where we've been, but more importantly, where we're going and where we are on the timeline for operational resilience overall. 19th of July, 2024, where were you? Were you in an airport? Planes weren't flying. Were you trying to get on and get some money out of a bank? You probably couldn't do that. It was only 131 working days before this operational resilience rule called DORA was due to be introduced, but we were all stuck. There's $10 billion of economic activity that didn't happen because of something called a memory read error that happened on a platform no one had ever heard of called CrowdStrike, a bit of security software. And it had access to the kernel for an operating system for the entire world. So at that point, I knew we were on this journey, whether we liked it or not. There was no longer any chance any politician would take their foot off the gas. There is now a political will to address the risk that IT presents to the system itself. And the banks are first in the firing line, but it's going to continue. And I think on these Redcasts, we've heard some great perspectives about what this actually means to corporates, how the whole system needs to hang together. But we haven't really dug into the supply chain perspective so far. Because this stuff gets really complicated. When you start talking about what does a bank have to do, it has to be able to do controls end to end, which will pick up many different types of suppliers. So how they think about testing software, how they deal with incidents if something happens, what their contract says, all comes on the table. And the bottom line is it's going to take us years to sort out the detailed standards to work out what do we think good looks like. So ultimately, those are very detailed conversations that have not happened yet, but yet we are only days away from having to become compliant, right? So there's a disconnect there, and I want to pivot to, well, what does that really mean from a supplier perspective? What kind of tools and strategies do suppliers need to be thinking about and working with these big ships of financial entities of which they're just a piece of rigging? And ultimately then what the DORA countdown means to them. So I'm really delighted to bring on 2 very experienced technology control virtuosos here. Monica, we share a common heritage in a whole bunch of ways, not least that we did MIFID together. Why don't you come off mute and introduce yourself, spend a bit of time on your perspectives on this particular topic.
Sure, thanks, PJ. Hi, everybody. I am Monica Sasso. I've been on this podcast before, and actually I listen to this podcast regularly, so you can read into that whatever you want. I work at Red Hat. I am our global financial services digital transformation lead. I also lead all things operational resilience for us, which is obviously what we're here essentially to talk about. I joined Red Hat from Deutsche Wealth Management, as PJ said, where I was the deputy global head of reg and risk change. And for my sins, I did deliver MiFID II, among other regulations, but that was a big one for us. Around the same time, we had GDPR as well, which was another huge one. And Anne and I were at an event earlier this week, and we were both kind of getting mutually frustrated that people were comparing DORA to GDPR. And it's like, no, they're not the same things, not even close. So that's my background. My perspective on this, I think it's not dissimilar to yours, PJ, right? I think I can't remember if you were at this event a few years ago in London with, I can't remember the body, I should have remembered it. And it was a closed doors, Chatham House rule conversation around, should big tech be regulated or not? And what came out of it is actually a lot of these technology services that we are all so reliant on every day. Right? PJ, before we kicked off and started recording, I dimmed my lights when I went on mute and I shouted at them to dim, right? We are all so reliant on technology now. And I think we're getting to that point where people are starting to think of them as utilities. And when it's a utility, they are treated very differently than if it's a cool toy, somewhere to play with, or if it's the nerds in the basement. And I think that's where we're starting to shift from a wider societal point of view. Going back to the 19th of July, thankfully, I was not planning on going anywhere. So I was fine. None of my travel was interrupted. I think I was at home in London, probably enjoying whatever was around in the summer holidays. So I think this is an important conversation, but I think we need to have it way bigger than just banks and financial services, because at the end of the day, so many other industries are reliant on financial services because the whole idea is to buy or sell something. And when you buy or sell something, what do? You make a payment. And 9 times out of 10 these days, payments are electronic or digital.
No, precisely. I think you're spot on there with that, thinking about the broader context. And Anne, you come at the big broader context in other ways as well. I see lots of posts from you and very interesting thematic reviews, but also some detailed stuff you've been involved with, like AI and cyber. How do you come at this operational resilience topic?
So I try and come at it from two sides. And Monica and I actually brainstorm about this quite a lot, challenging our thinking and kind of going, are we thinking about this right? And it's uncomfortable to constantly revisit your sort of positions on things, but I actually think it's healthy discomfort. And when I get involved in industry groups or even with my own colleagues, interactions with clients, a lot of what I do is getting people to let go of their belief about something and a certainty that we're covered, we're good, we've always done this, it hasn't broken, we're necessarily in good shape. And to come to your point about the 19th of July, I happened to be in London. And my first realization that something was going on was I toddled out of IBM's York Road office to go and get a coffee. And I was greeted at the corner bakery by a guy handing out cake. And I thought, wow, this is great. Why is he handing out cake? Now, the reason they were handing out cake was because they were trying to bribe people with cake to get people who otherwise would have been paying with their cards in store to download the app, because they couldn't process the payments and they couldn't take cash. And when I downloaded the app, got my coffee and my free cake, and I left, and I was wondering, how much business are they losing because other people didn't want the friction? And how much business are they losing because they'd made that decision, probably for good reasons in normal operating conditions where not taking cash was a viable option. But in an unforeseen circumstance, suddenly they were less resilient to continue serving coffee and have people buy cake. And it just made me think about how good are our mental models in financial institutions and in energy and in healthcare and in telco about how willing are we to envisage scenarios of disruption. And I say without any shadow of judgment, collectively, we're not great. We're not great at envisaging disruption because it's uncomfortable. But
I guess that's the sort of the point of this whole regulation, right? Is to get people out of their silos and thinking about the end to end. And that's where, to me, it comes to the suppliers, right? I've had jobs where I've had lots of suppliers, lots of contracts to deal with. These are legacy relationships. This is decades of archaeology to figure out how these relationships are formed, and even before understanding what is coming at you, even just where you are, right? So that positioning conversation is critical, and we all want to have better types of cross silo type conversations. But how are global technology suppliers really now starting to think about breaking some of that silo thinking down internally, and then having a more joined up conversation with their financial entities? Monica, why don't we kick off with you?
That's easy and difficult to answer all in the same time. So if I dance around my words, I think you'll know why. We are having these conversations, PJ, and I think actually this is where, for a company like Red Hat, whose pedigree is open source, it's much easier for us to have them, because open source is actually, well, let's be honest, it could be an answer to some of these wider challenges, because the code is out there, because it's open. You can see, your software supply chain, for example. You can see all of these things. So having that clarity and that transparency almost allows us to then have a proper, dare I say, open conversation about who's in our supply chain, how we develop software, how we put guardrails in, how we do A, B, C, D, all the way through to Z, and then how that could fit into the organization's own supply chain as well. I guess on the other hand, from a managed services point of view, it's all out there in the public domain, but we're fourth party providers for some of the hyperscalers, so we're dependent almost on them to be able to provide a service back to our clients. And that's I think where it starts to get, that's where it starts to get interesting.
Well, as a leader, you're used to these interesting situations. Where do you think this needs to go? Because you just hit on a really good example there. You're a fourth party, but you're also, a first party.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got to bring these conversations together. What happens?
And I think this is where collectively, as two industries or as grown-ups or whatever, we have to change who we speak to within the organizations, and equally, the control functions in the organizations should want to speak to us, and should want to speak to us with their IT colleagues. And I think, you said my favorite and most hated word in the whole world, which is silos, right? Every firm, and it's not just financial services. I see it with my husband who works in healthcare. The silos are everywhere. Nobody wants to knock them down and hold hands and sing kumbaya. But guess what? In order to not, to your point, Anne, right? In order to not have to give away free cake to get people to download an app, you have to knock down silos. And I think for me, that's where we need to get better together with our clients and customers, is be bold enough and go, actually, can we please speak with your chief risk officer? Can we please have an open conversation? Can all of us be in the room together? That's never happened before, right? We're with procurement people, or we're with infrastructure people. And for me, this is where it starts to become a little bit, I don't know if we've started recording or not, but I'll say it anyway, Anne. This is where it starts to come, again, the dreaded phrase, soft skills come in, right? This is where interpersonal skills come in, and being actually brave enough to say, no, we need to speak to your chief risk officer, or please, can we speak to somebody in compliance, because we want to have this broader conversation. I don't think anybody's doing that yet.
And what I'd love to see happen more is people being brave enough to acknowledge that I don't mean sort of me, my team, we as an industry collectively, like the big we don't really know what our supply chains look like. We don't really know what our own organizational internal supply chains look like. And more to try and help these discussions move forward, I've been trying to make friends with enterprise architects. I've been trying to talk to people who know about service design, people who know the discipline and the skill involved in mapping things out end to end. Because if you can put a picture, even if it's incomplete, hopefully it does need to be kind of accurate. It could be partially incomplete, but you need to have a view of how your organization fits together and what parts of it are touched by these issues. So procurement, legal, risk, security, IT, ops, it's so many functional areas, all of whom have a remit and a kind of a mandate and a way of working that could mean that they siloed, completely distanced from the ways of working of other people involved in that internal supply chain. So that's one big block of things that needs to be clarified. And then there's the external supply chain of who's in it and what level of dependency do we have? And if that thing went down, what would it mean for our ability as a cloud provider to deliver our cloud service to a financial entity? How critical are we? And we start to realize we don't know ourselves very well. And there are gray areas around what would happen if. And the only way that I can see, and if people have better ideas, please do share. But the only way I can see right now is better conversations and more of them. The problem is that takes time.
Well, and they have to be specific conversations.
Specific conversations with targeted questions. Yeah.
Exactly. The self-awareness doesn't happen unless without context, right? So if it's an execution, a trading execution problem with the buy side to sell side, it's going to look completely different than if it's sell side to venue.
Totally. And
there'll be different people in the room, but they're probably talking about the same stuff, but they will exempt themselves if it's not exactly their stuff. And I think what you're getting at is so critical, which is, we have thousands of financial entities speaking to thousands of potential suppliers that have lots of relationships between themselves. This giant network won't clear itself. We have to understand, in the context of the business being provided, what is critical or important in my business for this flow, and what are the supply relationships, and when something breaks, what do we do about it? What does good risk management look like for OTC agency broking? These are the conversations I've never heard. I don't know, Monica, are you hearing any more focused business conversations across the supply chain?
None. No, not like that. Not to that level. But what you just said, PJ, would almost be foreign to a line of business in OTC. They would be like, my IT guys make sure my platform's up and running. I don't care. My procurement team manages my relationships with my third parties. Done. And it goes back to your first thing, right? I'm going to sound like a broken record, and that the only thing I came here prepared with was to moan about silos. But that's it. The silos are still there. And I think I've said this earlier this year I know I said this earlier this year, and I'm going to say it again when we did one of these with you in January, February, before the Reg Tech conference, PJ, was this is where I think the 3 lines of defense model needs to be rethought about, because this is ingrained in our psyche as a former banker, much like you, PJ, right? We both worked in banks. Here's my lane. That's your lane. That's your lane, right? And then here as a tech provider, you provide us A, B, and C services and D, E, and F products. That is really just reinforced by the 3 lines of defense model. And if we didn't have that, we had a different, more broad way of thinking about risk and holistically, I think it would be easier for going back to your OTC example, the person would not be, the line of business for OTC would not be going, go talk to my procurement person, or go talk to my blah, blah, blah. And I think this is where actually it's a fundamental culture shift.
Yeah.
But is it that fundamental? I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about good customer service, right? You're talking about doing the business in the context in which the business is done. It's just the technology lens on it. I mean, and you spoke earlier about, the shared competencies. Isn't that really what those competencies have to get to?
I think it's where they need to get to. But I mean, if you think about sort of customer centricity, all organizations are not equal in that. Everybody's going to say they care about customers. A lot of organizations care about the revenue that customers bring. And where I think there's going to be a shift driven by operational resilience is kind of like the enlightened management, the enlightened leadership, and the quotient that's applied to positioning the op-res paradigm as something that underpins the business to drive better outcomes that are mutually reinforcing. And I think that's where good relationships between end users and their bank, or sort of buy side, sell side, technology providers and their customers. How can we win and help you win, right? And that it shows up in behaviors, that it's not a cliche. It's not just something that gets placarded in a kickoff deck to motivate the troops. It's actually a lived behavior. Thinking about, if I concede something in a contract, it's not a concession. I'm doing it intentionally, because by doing that, you're going to be able to potentially consume more. And losing what can often happen when you're in a context of negotiating contracts, adversarial thinking. Right now, I do work in cybersecurity, and I have to keep reminding people, clients are not adversaries. We have adversaries. We have ransomware attackers. We have nation state threats. Clients looking for more transparency, more flexibility, a different way of working, that is not an adversary, right? We need to shift how we're thinking about our mutual dependency on each other, and how can we all behave slightly different and not perceive it as a loss or as a burden, something that we need to shy away from, but how can we shift how we behave commercially and technically in a way that ends up actually helping both sides of that equation? And I still think we're quite a long way away from that.
Yes, but what you described, though, Anne, is a completely different operating model, right? This is a paradigm shift in decision makers. This is a paradigm shift and actually, I was thinking about this earlier, and you'll have to forgive me, it's Friday afternoon. This is where we are then become married to each other, right? We're no longer swiping right or swiping left. We're not using Tinder. This is not a transactional thing, right? We are married. And when you're married, you might have to make compromises, to your point, Anne, but actually you both really, at the end of the day, you want the same thing. You just want to be happy, and you want to, well, you each want to make money, right?
Shared fate.
Because, yeah, exactly. A shared fate. And I think that's actually, was it shared fate? I can't remember who came. Was that you or was that somebody else? Doesn't matter. It is a shared fate, right? And I think that the 19th of July pointed out that it's a shared fate. It's not a shared responsibility with a little pretty racy that says you're accountable for this. I'm responsible for this. Oh, but you ultimately hold a baking license, so you're the one who's next on the block. La la la. I actually think you have to transition past that and think it's a shared fate. And how do you talk about your shared fate in a better way? It goes back to your favorite saying, Anne, which is a shared competency, which is what the Boffin talked about, right? And that is a step change. That's a different operating model. That's different people at the helm with different mindsets. And I think we're very far away from that.
But and one of the reasons I think we're far away is it may be shared but not equally, right? So the power
100%,
dynamics
100%.
of a utility that can turn on or off the data feed or the electricity at will, isn't really like a Tinder relationship. So you really need to negotiate. It's like fighting City Hall. It's not, they're going to hit you with a legal document that says sign my addendum within 3 days, right? This isn't a peer-to-peer discussion.
But that's what DORA wants to prevent. They want to prevent that from sign this document in 3 days, or we turn off your electricity if you don't pay your bills. Right?
I think, though, the reality is with this deadline, we're back to the theme of now versus longer term. But short term, we're going to be drowning in legal intervention.
Yes. And I think that goes for both mine and Anne's organizations. But ultimately, you have to have a starting point. And I think, Anne, we were both at a conference on Tuesday with some partners in London. All the whatever the 17th of January, whatever the date is, I don't even know, 25th of January, whatever it is in January. It's a starting point. It's not the end.
Yeah.
This is the beginning of a new way of operating and existing. And it's not a tick box activity. The number of clients that I speak to, or colleagues or whatever that I speak to in the industry, in financial services, in tech, they think, oh, we've ticked all of our boxes. Nah, mate, this ain't a tick box activity.
Yeah. I think actually maybe one of the most refreshing insights that I got recently was somebody from the risk function in a major UK bank saying, what we're aiming for January is that we have a plan and that we've uncovered as many of the unknowns as possible. And we are aiming for compliance in a 5 to 7 year time frame. And we think that's okay, because that's the time that's going to take us to embed this everywhere.
But that's a really grown-up way of coming at it.
It's a grown-up way of approaching it.
I think was it Rumsfeld, right? It's the risk matrix. It's your unknown unknowns. Use that a lot in cybersecurity, but I also think you can think about this in terms of supply chain as well, right? We could go back to SolarWinds. We could talk about Log4j. Log4j was unknown unknowns for people that used a lot of proprietary software and were not capitalizing on open source or didn't use lots of automation, right? If you used automation, it was a known unknown.
So, Monica, you listen to Redcast, and I think Gavin, who was on the last one, is very thoughtful about the regulatory perspectives in the transatlantic divide. The impression I took away from that one was the UK is really waiting to position against DORA. And that 7 years from now, after a series of events, we could have something much different in a much different type of regime. And I don't know, as a supplier, as a set of supplier conversations, are people really looking at it that way? Are they really thinking about the risks that all these unknowns of the other jurisdictions could bring in?
I mean, I don't know that. So the UK has you know this, PJ, better than anybody else, better than I do, probably better than Anne as well. The UK has had something in place for a while. What the UK's done is split apart all of the elements of DORA and put them in different pockets, right, of regulation, which actually I think in a lot of ways have made it more digestible. Because DORA is such a big beast that trying to figure out where it slots in any organization and who's going to own it, that's actually the number one challenge I hear from clients when I speak to them is we don't know where it sits in the organization. And my thoughts are, well, it sits with the CEO. It sits with the board.
Yeah.
But we all have been in banks and tech companies long enough to know that either it's going to go in IT or it's going to go in the business, or it's like, MadMar, which sits in the compliance function, blah, 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 right? So I think the UK has done a lot of this stuff already under a different guise. And now one of the things that DORA is looking at, which is actually kind of doubling down on the tech companies and almost regulating them, right? Well, that's what they're going to do with some of the bigger ones. The HMT is looking at doing just that, but for the entire economy, so that when the 19th of July happens again, it's not just the banks that are under the cosh, it's everybody. So is the UK sitting back and waiting, or are they doing nothing? I actually think the UK has been leading quite a lot by being a lot more principles-led. And Anne, you and I have had this discussion with wine, without wine, with coffee, mostly with coffee and wine. Is this idea of principles-led regulations versus tick box regulations. And historically, the European regulations have been fairly prescriptive. And it's been down to each country with how they prescribe. If you have to have color blue, it needs to be this RAL, right? Now we're moving into this area, which actually has always been the UK's strength, is principles-led regulations and directives and laws. And that's going to take some time. So I don't think that the UK is sitting back and doing nothing. I think it's continuing to be principles-led. Could it maybe be a little bit stronger and open and vocal? Probably. But we're not here to talk about Brexit.
So just on that, one of the big differences that I'm seeing in between the UK and DORA and continental Europe is the focus on customer harm in the UK. Yeah. Now, you could say it's maybe implicit in DORA, but it's explicit in the UK.
Yes.
And I'm seeing that as potentially beneficial in helping bring the conversation to the business line and making this thing unarguable, which is, what are we all vested in? Preventing customer harm. If this goes down, will it will it cause customer harm? If we invest in this, will it prevent customer harm? So it just helps to focus the conversation. The other thing that I'm noticing is that there's a shared concern in jurisdictions like the US, right? So broadly, authorities are concerned about the same thing: dependency on tech, commercial dominance, et cetera, et cetera. Right? The US Treasury put out a report not that long ago pointing to many of the same issues from a policy perspective as are in scope for concern in the UK and the EU. But difference to the UK and the EU, for now at least, the US authorities don't seem to want to legislate. They don't want to bring in another layer of regulation. And what I'm interested to see is which approach is going to deliver better outcomes in what time frame? Is the self-organizing and hoping that the industry will take the baton and run with it in the US under a benevolent nudge from the physic and the other groups that have been working really, really hard on this? Or does it require the stick of enforcement? Which works better?
Well, but even regardless, now that there is a baseline from one jurisdiction, it forces that mapping to happen. And it forces a global framework to start being applied. And it's not just to operational resilience. I mean, as we've highlighted, right? We have the cyber rules, we have the AI rules. They will all be built upon the foundations that DORA lays. Yeah. And ultimately, those open standards Monica referred to, they have to become digestible with RegTech, right? You can't map all this stuff by looking, cutting and pasting in spreadsheets.
It's totally impossible.
And it doesn't matter how smart a human you are, right? There's no way that any non-human augmented capability can manage. So the role of RegTech is absolutely crucial. Machine readable standards that are internationally recognized, non-duplicated. All of those things we've learned them in different domains of regulation. We've all, you mentioned MiFID, we've all been involved in these sort of things. And I'm hopeful that we'll take that forward and not make the same mistakes that we've made in the past that have been hard and have slowed things down. Because we work in compliance, and I wouldn't say we get excited about it, but we kind of believe in the importance of it. Yeah. Lots of people don't. Lots of people don't care. And I've given up trying to get everybody to care about compliance. But people, what they do care right now in many organizations is something like AI, right? Everybody is latching on to that. And what I keep trying to tell people is, if you want to be really good at that and do it in a way that it doesn't come back and bite you and hurt you, you need a foundation that's solid, and you need to be able to understand how you're managing your data. What regulations are you subject to? Who's in your supply chain? All of the things that we've alluded to in the context of OpRes and DORA. So trying to rally people to the good fight of OpRes. Some people get it, some people don't, some people care, some people don't. But trying to find the lever, and I'm finding that AI, generative AI, is something that excites a lot of people, particularly boardroom stakeholders. And selling the value of OpRes in that context can be a tactical way of getting people to give more of their attention span to it.
Yeah, amen to that. I think it's just fantastic to see what you can do, especially because all this documentation is unstructured. Yeah. And it was what the large language models were built for. And there is, unlike, if people think about regulation, they think about a MiFID or a EMEA or a MAR. They think about transactional databases and stores where you have to reference things and make decisions, Boolean, if then else, blah. This is also making decisions, but it's on a completely unstructured data set. And hurrah, Gen AI showed up just in time.
Well, it's on unstructured data set, but it wholly relies on the firm's risk appetite, right? And to your point, Anne, it's about, the end of the day, do no harm. And I think we go back to the Hippocratic Oath and some of these things. That's what it feels like, actually. The one thing I would say about AI, now I'm going to be controversial, and I think, and by the way, Anne, I agree with you on this topic 100%. And it's probably an area where I have failed, and I could do more in selling internally in that regard. Is that what I have seen so far? Is that people want AI to solve this problem for them, and I don't think that that's the answer either, right? So you can't just magic this away. Instead, they have to be, again, it has to be a symbiotic relationship. And you need one to make the other flourish. AI is not going to solve your OpRes problem, because your OpRes problem comes back to risk appetite, it comes back to culture, it comes back to context. And you can't AI context away, but you can certainly use AI to help you figure out your context and operate within your context. And that's again where we go back to art versus science.
Yeah, that's such a key point. I guess, and just moving to wrap up, I guess, how are you thinking about future proofing these relationships. So you very elegantly stated it's about the plan, but it's also, I think, a bit about the past and thinking about, well, the future and other stuff that hasn't been considered as part of the plan. How do you come up with a good forward-looking strategy for sustainable and resilient partnerships?
So I kind of bring bits and pieces that I've learned from different disciplines. So I started my career in banking and then moved into regulation and then moved into cybersecurity. And one of the big things that I learned as a novice in cybersecurity is that you can't protect anything that you can't see or that you don't know about. So visibility, who's in your supply chain, internally and externally, and trying to be really clear about where you have to have those touch points. What do you know about yourself? Sort of the Stoic thing, know thyself. Where are we good? Where do we have gaps? And being honest about that. And at the risk of sounding a little bit puerile, pictures, documenting pictures and getting agreement of this is our as is state. And I was, challenging myself on that and kind of going, is that a reasonable thing to be recommending? But I spent some time last week with somebody who's done systems, so systems thinking and complex process engineering. He goes, that's where we start, is getting an honest view of where we are. What have we got? And if our supply chain currently involves a guy called Kevin, who happens to have a really key skill, and Kevin happens to not be there, we have to know that there's a Kevin in the supply chain. No, it doesn't look great. But denying that he's there isn't going to help us. So it could be Jane, right? It doesn't matter. But my point is that we have to be honest about ourselves, about all of the legacy dust that we've acquired that needs a good sweep out, and taking this as an opportunity not to name and shame and blame people for the things they didn't do in the past, acknowledging that it is as it is, and then trying to make it better. And that's where the culture point that Monica mentioned is super important, because if you're in an organization that enjoys and revels and taking pot shots at people, they're not going to want to do this, right? So the organizations that get good at this are the ones where they're more focused on how do we get better, as opposed to blaming the people of the past for what they didn't do, or the things that broke, or the investments that didn't quite hit the mark. So I'm really encouraging people to document things where you can make it visual, socialize it, get agreement on it. Some things have to be unarguable, right? A target outcome would be a good thing, and the as-is starting point. And then there needs to be a willingness to embrace that messy middle of how are we going to get from one to the other, and embracing the fact that you're not going to have won the marathon on the 17th of January because the marathon's only just starting.
Thank you, Monica. Tremendous amount there. How would you answer the same question?
I mean, I'm just going to build on it, because I would say the exact same things. I don't think it's puerile at all, and to do pictures. And in fact, I have a systems engineering degree. My brain works that way, right? Lots of people learn and read and understand things differently, but actually everybody can understand a picture. And I remember one of the first things I did when I was the head of change at a bank here in the UK, and we were doing a huge portfolio of change, and I knew it was going to mess with the client journey. So I took my entire team into a room for 2 whole days. I had 15 of us in a room, and I got the same room, and it had glass walls, and I got every kind of sticky note you could imagine. I said, all right, guys, let's map out the client journey. And when we're done with mapping out the client journey, let's map out all of the system touch points and where all the data is going to come in or out, where we're going to change it, all this stuff. So I think picture is incredibly important. And I think that is a way to also get everybody on the same page, to your point, Anne, because you can't, when everybody's in accord and it's written down and it's in black and white, you can't have fifth columnists, right? They're not going to be able to dispute that. But most importantly, it's that dependencies piece. So when you have it all written down, it's the dependencies. That's where we see when I work a lot with clients, and we're talking about, okay, well, Monica, can you help us? We want to get into a relationship with you. Help us, think about a DR strategy. Help us think about an exit strategy. How can we use the hybrid cloud for whatever reason? Okay, brilliant. let's start with the dependencies, guys. And then you start to go, oh my gosh, we have a piece of data over there in a system. We don't know who owns it, to your point. It's Jane or Kevin. They've retired. How do we get it out of there? How do we access it? How do we change it? And I think that's where we're going to start to see, if people are willing to do that, I think you'll start to see teams and firms thrive.
Well, thank you for those building on that perspective. I think just in wrapping up, all I will add is those pictures are great. The context is fundamental. The standards are key. However, what will dictate your timeline are events. And we're coming up to a milestone. If nothing happens on the 20th of January, we may not hear about this for a while. If CrowdStrike 2 happens, and we have the January surprise, I think ultimately this could move very, very quickly. So I'll just leave it at the end at this point in time for the DORA implementation drive, that we still have a lot of known unknowns out there and a lot of unknown unknowns that will really accelerate this. And it can only help that we've had these conversations as a warm up. But there's so much more to come. So stay tuned. We're going to figure out where to take this next. There's tons of research on the website now. I won't go recite all of them, but we've got into TradFi as well as DeFi. We're talking about standards globally, and we're looking at how to engage with some of the trade associations, how to make sure we can use the reg tech to be able to help solve some of these problems. And I think ultimately it's going to be a really exciting ride in the Operation Resilience Marathon space. So lastly, thank you guys. It's been fantastic talking to you. It has been Friday, but it's been a great chat, and I really have enjoyed it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed the content, please like us so more people can join the conversation. Download all our episodes via all the major platforms. Come to the JWG website, which is jwg-it.eu, and follow our LinkedIn groups.